So hello, everybody. Welcome to our Wisconsin event today. Thank you for joining us. Our Wisconsin primary election ballots are arriving as we speak. If you have submitted a ballot request, known as the FPCA this year, you should have received your ballot by now. If it's not in your inbox, check your spam folder. And if it's not there, please follow up right away with your local clerk. And if you haven't yet submitted an FPCA in 2024, join us after the call in the voter assistance Zoom room. I'm going to share this link to that, and I will share the link again at the end of this meeting. And if you go over there, you'll be able to get some help from our experts. And our first speaker today is Yuseli Flores. I hope I've said that right. Yuseli is a community mobilizer on the south side of Milwaukee, a traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland. She uses her voice, organizing skills, and her knowledge about social issues to proactively write, speak at, and generate events that focus on self-determination and beloved community. She currently serves as the Racial Equity and Economic Justice Advocate, as well as the co-organizing director for the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. And thanks to the hard work of that group, together with the voters of Wisconsin who elected a new progressive justice to the state Supreme Court last year, Wisconsin finally has fair maps for the first time in decades. And joining in a little bit is Nick Ramos, who is the executive director of Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Nick has a wide range of experience and expertise in voting administration, state elections, and community outreach. Before joining Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, Nick served as voter ID coalition coordinator at Vote Riders, a nonpartisan organization that works to ensure that all eligible voters have access to photo ID in order to cast their ballot and have it count. So I'm going to have Yuseli start out by explaining to you about Wisconsin's history of gerrymandering and how that will change in this election cycle. If you have questions, please type * hand up in the chat box. And Yuseli, do you want to take questions as you're going along, or do you want them at the end?
I can take questions as they're going along. Also feel free to interrupt me because I do tend to talk very fast. And now that I know this like the back of my hand, I will definitely talk relatively fast. So please, at any point. Thank you.
Okay, over to you then. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the lovely introduction. I am very grateful to be in community with you all. It is amazing to see that there is civic engagement and involvement all around the world, especially for Wisconsin. Thank you all so much. Well, you already know me. I also do work at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. The Fair Maps Coalition lives under the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign as we are the fiscal sponsor for the coalition. Our mission is to ensure that we have a representative government for all by advocating for and enacting in law and in practice an independent and nonpartisan redistricting process, building a truly fair and accountable judiciary, and securing the rights of the populace and to fair and equal access to voting by educating and engaging the people of Wisconsin. We are composed of what we call a nonprofit lead team. We work in 3 different buckets of work. One of it is the nonprofit world, the other is the legislative, judicial level, and the other is the grassroots level. So at the lead team, these are just some of the member organizations that some of you might already know or already participate in some way or another. And at the judicial and legislative level, we at Wisconsin Democracy Campaign have the possibility to lobby. So we are definitely in the ear of a lot of our elected officials to making sure that we are accurately represented and they hear our voices. And then at the grassroots level, we just revamped our activist lead teams. So we have at least 2 or 4 very, very core activists and organizers in each congressional district in Wisconsin, which is great for us because they are the ones that lead the work, the people at the, at every single door that is knocking right now, asking people to vote no on the referendums, asking people to participate in and see their new voting map. So those are the 3 buckets of work that we're in. The last time that there was any cooperative bipartisan legislation, Lou Alcindor, respectively known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar of the Milwaukee Bucks, and Oscar Robertson of the Baltimore Bullets, that team doesn't even exist anymore, met in Game 3 of the NBA playoffs. But then for the 3 decades following, there was a lot of partisan bickering within the judicial branches, and so the maps were drawn by federal judges. And in 2010, we had what was called a trifecta. Democrats had the majority in both chambers of the legislature and the governor, but they didn't use the opportunity to pass nonpartisan redistricting legislation, even though there were some efforts by some legislators that continue to push those efforts to this day. But they thought that they would win. So they thought that, that by 2010, the maps that they would have drawn would have given them as much advantage as the current maps advantage the Republican Party now. And I think everybody for a long time still kicked themselves in the back for realizing that they should have done something and they didn't. And we all know that behind closed doors, Republicans drew these maps. They didn't allow press. You had to sign a kind of a waiver saying you wouldn't disclose anything that happened inside these doors. And in front of those doors, I was there along with maybe some of you who were here in the States in 2010, protesting against Act 10, protesting against all of the, issues that Scott Walker got rid of, including in-state tuition for undocumented students. I'm an undocumented person living in the US. I do have DACA, but he got rid of in-state tuition for youth. He got rid of driver's licenses for all. So we were too busy fighting the little fires that were in front of us and not recognizing the huge, huge fire that was happening behind closed doors. And we suffered for 14 years. So in 2019 and in 2020, the Marquette poll asked voters whether they wanted a redistricting to be done by the governor and the legislature or by nonpartisan commission, and people really value the Marquette poll. I recommend that if you don't know about it, which I'm sure some of you do, just look it up to see kind of how Wisconsinites are thinking, even for the upcoming election. But 72% of them in 2019 wanted a nonpartisan commission, and 70% wanted a nonpartisan commission in 2020. So, this just tells us how people are thinking. But our reality is that in Wisconsin, the state constitution makes the legislature responsible for electoral maps. The governor can sign the maps into law or veto them, which is what happened a year ago. Wisconsin has no citizen-initiated ballot referendum process to change the constitution, like Michigan, for example. Katie Fahey, who led that effort in Michigan, was very successful because they did have a citizen-initiated ballot. But what has to happen and what we have to do is that we have to have a joint resolution that passes 2 consecutive sessions of the legislature before going to the voters for an up or down vote. And because of the power of our voice and the power of our activists and the power of our community, unfortunately, in 2023, the Wisconsin State Legislature prohibited municipalities and counties from holding advisory referendums on state level issues. Just have to sit with that for a minute because we were so powerful that they had to take some of our voice away. Between 2014 and 2019, we passed referendums in 8 counties. On April 7th, 2020, 9 referendums were passed. In 2020, 11 referendums passed. 57 counties back fair maps, 57 counties passed resolutions, and 32 counties passed referendums. We did our best to try to get our voices heard. And this Wisconsin map just kind of tells that story. And then by 2023, they got rid of it because they knew that if we organized enough, we would have gotten almost every single county to back fair maps. So what happened next, right? Kind of what happened leading us to after the 2020 census. So there was nonpartisan redistricting legislation introduced by Senator Jeff Smith and Devin Draka in 2021. They have been introducing the same legislation time and time again. We had a rally asking for a public hearing, and we got no committee hearing or any floor debate. Then the People's Maps Commission, which was a commission that was established by the governor to help draw nonpartisan maps with experts and residents through 2020 and 2021. We had hearings, right? We went all over the state to kind of ask people what they wanted to present. We also held panel discussions and trainings for residents so they could draw their own community maps. We collected over 800 plus community maps to kind of push the need for more community input. And then when census numbers were sent to the Evers, the Republican-controlled legislature opened a map submission portal for less than 2 months, allowing us to submit maps. And again, we overflowed those maps. And there was in that same process, 5 days after closing its map portal, the GOP drawn legislative maps were introduced. There was one open hearing on October 28th, 2021. They told us 7 days before the hearing that this was going to be a thing. More than 150 activists spoke against it. There were 9 hours worth of testimony, and only 2 people spoke in favor of the new maps, Robin Voss and Senator LeMahieu. All other 150 people were asking for a fairer process. We were there for 9 hours. So between November 2021 and April 2022, the maps went back and forth between Wisconsin and the U.S. Supreme Court. Governor Evers obviously vetoed the maps drawn by the GOP. Then the GOP legislature appealed the maps to the Wisconsin court, and the court decided to use a least change approach model when choosing new maps, which meant keeping the gerrymander.
Unknown caller.
Sorry?
Excuse me.
Okay, I'll keep going. And so then the GOP legislature appealed those maps. The court decided to use a least change approach model. And then the Wisconsin Supreme Court chose Governor Evers' least change maps. Then the GOP legislature appealed the Wisconsin Supreme Court decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. So there was a lot of back and forth. These are just some of the biggest things that were covered all over the country. Wisconsin was on the news for a while regarding this issue. But this is the reality. We asked, thousands of people what they wanted, and we're not getting it because of gerrymandered maps. 87% want universal background checks for gun purchases. 86% want renewable energy efforts. 73% want a major increase in state aid for special education. 72% want to repeal the 1849 abortion ban. 72% want action to regulate carbon pollution. 64% want to legalize medical cannabis. 62% expand Medicaid. 55% increase the minimum wage. And a lot of times when we are talking to community and when we are in kind of more bipartisan spaces, people think this is like a Democratic effort, but because of these values and these things that Wisconsinites want. But this is what Wisconsinites want. It's beyond being a Democrat or Republican. This is just like our livelihood at stake. And so I just have to name that because I am tabling at a lot of events and people are like, oh, you're too Democratic for me, or this brochure is too Democratic for me. I'm like, yeah, Democratic with the lowercase d. We want a democracy that values everybody's input. And so here between 2006 and 2022, you can see because Wisconsin is a purple state, the graph just kind of shows how voters have been fairly evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, since 2010. But in the graphs below, you can see that the legislature has been overwhelmingly Republican, regardless of the vote count, unfortunately. And this is due to rigged maps that the Republicans drew after the census in 2010 and 2020. For instance, in 2022, more voters statewide chose Democrats, but in the state assembly and Senate, the Democrats actually lost seats, even though they won 3 of 5 statewide races. And then if you can see, statewide races as shown below have been fairly split between the 2 major parties, a much more accurate reflection of how purple Wisconsin really is. With these new legislative maps in 2024, Wisconsin voters will finally have the opportunity to elect a more representative and balanced state legislature that can be accountable to voters. And so what happened in 2023? The Wisconsin Supreme Court election, one of the most expensive Supreme Court elections in the nation. Almost $50 million were used to sway voters. And we could have used those $50 million for a lot of other things. But thankfully, Janet Protasiewicz won. And we targeted 15,000 young BIPOC voters who didn't often vote in spring elections, Black, Indigenous, people of color voters. And volunteers across the state wrote personal messages. We paid for postage to help turn out the vote. and we were successful. Protasiewicz won in 2023. Although this this isn't as red as normal, but it does tell the story that Wisconsin is historically a purple state, and we won by a margin of the votes. And by that, when I say we, I mean Protasiewicz, but obviously like ending the gerrymander won by a margin of votes. So what happened in 2023? Law Forward petitioned the Wisconsin Supreme Court to declare the state legislative maps unconstitutional. The Supreme Court issued an order that it would hear the claims 4 and 5, which was limited to, they submitted many claims, but they only heard whether they're not unconstitutional or whether they are on the lines of contingency and if they make sense for people of color and communities of color. 5 other parties also filed as petitioners or interveners. And then in November 2021, in November 21st, 2023, they heard oral arguments of Clark versus the Wisconsin Elections Commission. The court declared the maps unconstitutional based on non-contiguity and set in motion the process and criteria for new maps of the 2024 election cycle. Least change was not a part of the criteria. The Supreme Court worked with experts that also helped draw the New York maps recently because they also went through a whole case. And so these experts had already been vetted by other states, have already been deemed successful. So that's who we trusted. All 6 parties, including, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and the other folks, including Law Forward, submitted maps for consideration by the court. And then again, on February 1st, redistricting experts were hired to issue this analysis that the maps were submitted. And we got to celebrate in Wisconsin on February 19th. The governor signed his own maps that he submitted to the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the Clark case into law. So these were the first legislatively passed maps signed by the governor since 2010 when Republicans were in control of both chambers. As you can see, my beautiful coworker is Carlene Beshin standing next to the governor. I'm in that tan kind of outfit. My boss, Nick Ramos, is there. All of our activists are in the back. We were just waiting for this moment for 14 years. And what we did next was we had to talk to people and educate community about what this meant for them. A lot of people were confused. A lot of people thought that maybe these maps were going to be accessible until the November election. So we had to really fight for this. And so although this is good for now, the new legislative voting maps are not gerrymandered to an extent, right? They're fairer, and they are slightly more reflective of the state's overall voting patterns, but they're not a permanent solution. And a lot of people think that, okay, this is done now. We have fair maps. No, we have fairer maps for the next 7 years, but we need legislation and a constitutional amendment to take politicians out of the map-making process before the next census in 2030. So because we have new legislative maps, these maps, again, are not gerrymandered. They're reflective of, all the voting patterns in the state. They provide an opportunity to finally elect representatives who are accountable to them. But also, they provide an opportunity for people that look like us to run for office in counties that they couldn't for the last 13 years. So although we're a nonpartisan organization, we're really excited that there's finally some push and pull, and that there's finally some accountability, and people will actually get to have some sort of battleground where they can actually have to go and are forced to talk to their constituents. Some people sat in these positions where they didn't even knock a door to tell them, like, hey, I'm your constituent. Like, we just want more political accurate representation, which is finally happening. So new legislative maps plus retirements of certain elected officials equals likely historic legislative turnover. The Democrats can narrow the GOP majority in 2024, but there's not a path to majority really until 2026, and that depends on their performance this year. There's 12 competitive seats that could determine the control of the state assembly. And again, this election cycle, only half of the seats are up for re-election. So that's why we're like, well, we can't really do anything until 2026, or not anything as broader. We can't, yeah. So this is just a chart that can show you the 12 most competitive assembly seats. I don't know if you are voters in some of these seats, but I would recommend if you know your district and your ward, you can see kind of the seats that are open. And I will make sure you get this presentation as well. So currently there's 46 safe GOP seats and 41 safe Dem seats. And I'll just leave it up for a second. Okay. This is the portion where I want to ask if you all would like to go through the new legislative map website where you can find your district and find your map. I know that because you might be abroad, you might not have like an address attached, or if there is in an area, I know somebody said they're voting in Sturgeon Bay. So if you do have an address there, I can gladly look it up so you can kind of see the differences or we can move on. I don't know, up to you all.
Yeah, if you can show us how to do this, we all have voting addresses in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So from abroad, what we do is we vote using the last address that we had in the United States.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the Mexican election, I can only vote for president. So I didn't know if it was different if you're abroad. Okay. All right, let me. And I just want to confirm you can still see my screen.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So you'll click on that website, and then at the bottom right here, you'll click Find My Map. And what I really like about how interactive this website is that, oh, nope. Okay. You can see on this left kind of like map, you can click to look for your Senate districts from 2022. And you can take that off and look at the new assembly districts in 2024 and then overlay all of them. And so I will put in, if anybody feels comfortable sharing their address in the chat, I can put that in. Yeah, I can put the website into the chat as well.
Yes, I'll give you my address.
Thanks.
It's actually not where my family lives anymore, but it's where I last voted, so.
Yeah, that makes sense. And while you do that, I will put the website in the chat as well.
That's a quick one. Has anyone been able to reach it, or do we need a VPN to be able to access this website? Because my computer's not loading it for some reason.
Yeah, some of the Wisconsin
I think it might
websites
be
are
the
like that, so you might need a VPN, or what I often use is the Opera browser, which has VPN incorporated in it. Let me try that.
Okay.
Oh, that's good to know. That is really good to know, actually, because then we can take back this to the state legislature and let them know, like, hey, there are people abroad that want to use this site.
Yeah, we have geo-blocking problems.
Okay, thank you for that. So as you can see, I will.
Oh, that's Sturgeon Bay.
This is Sturgeon Bay, and it didn't change much. It has slightly remained the same, but the cool part is that on the right you can see the legislators who represent your district in 2022 and the ones who will represent your district in 2024. So they're easily accessible and you can call them, and then it'll tell you who actually lives in your district in 2024 that represents you. So if you zoom out, yeah, and actually this one didn't change much, but if you go to like an area like Green Bay, this changed dramatically. So you can see again, the purple were the 2022 districts and the orange is now the 2024. So they were, the 2022 were kind of cut right down the middle, and the 2024 kind of opened it up a little bit more. But yes, on the right, you can see who in case it did change for you, you're able to see your legislators who represent you in 2022 and the ones that represent you in 2024.
So if the legislator no longer lives in the district, which is the case of Andre Jack, then he can't run to represent the district anymore, right?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, which again allows for better competition between both parties, because now somebody, can try to run, or at least has more of a fair shot at running. Winning, we don't know, but running definitely. Any questions before I move on and go back to the presentation?
Are these candidates or these?
No, these are actual legislators.
Okay.
So there is another website, and I can definitely share it for with you all for candidates. The Marquette Law School, there's this man who we work with, John Johnson, created kind of a tracker of people that are running for office and where they stand politically. We're also working with Common Cause to ask any legislative official that's running for office their stance on fair maps. And we're making kind of like a report card where you all can see the stance on where they stand on that issue.
Yeah, share that. That would be great.
Okay, I'm gonna try to find that presentation again. Right here. Okay. Big. Then let me escape. Slideshow. So it's kind of a glimpse of how we are using this website. We're especially using it in heavily previously gerrymandered districts, where if people do have concerns, they can find it themselves and see how their maps are going to look, as well as making sure people are checking in case their polling place change. So we're also making sure people are not just registered, but are seeing if their polling place changed at all. So yeah, this just kind of breaks down how to use it, and you can choose to see which map you'd like to see. I wonder if there's a question in the chat. And then you can also, this is also a little slightly, if you're into the nitty-gritty, which I won't go through, but I really recommend if you are, you can use Dave's Redistricting app to learn more about each individual voting district. And it looks at a lot of data about each assembly voting district. So you can look for demographics, you can look at their partisan lean. This is where we also got the Protasiewicz map that can kind of show the real story behind the voters and how they voted in the state. So you can see specific precinct details, the voting age gaps and pops. Do they affect the federal district as well in the state? I don't think so. No, we haven't discussed that. And that was, I think, something that the Supreme Court, we expected the Supreme Court to not do anything in terms of the federal district maps. Why, I don't know. And you can learn again about the new voting district maps. This again looks at a lot of very specific data. If you're into that, I will definitely make sure everybody has access to the links. And you can hit the QR code on your phone too if you want to play around with it on your phone. Although I do recommend a computer or like a tablet, because then the map gets really, really big, and it's a whole issue with zooming in, zooming out. But Wisconsin, we know that Wisconsin is a battleground state. We expect Wisconsin to be a culminating factor in the 2024 election. The WisPolitics, like I mentioned, assembled a webpage for you to see who's running, for the Assembly and the Senate, so you can track who's in, who's out, and who's on the move. There's a profile of each Assembly and Senate seat compiled through interviews, official announcements, and campaign registration statements created by John Johnson from Marquette Law. And these links are clickable as well, so you can see the Assembly map and you can see the Senate map and specific to your district. But what happens now? Our goal is to continue educating voters about their new voting district maps and the opportunity that they have to elect a more representative and accountable legislature. And it's important for us to elect representatives who support independent nonpartisan redistricting at the Fair Maps Coalition. So some of our members are C4s, which means that they can get more politically involved, and they do. And when they're interviewing candidates, they do ask them what they think about gerrymandering and whether they support a nonpartisan commission. So we are, taking down names and taking numbers to make sure we can hold these people accountable when and if they win. So it's really important to know who is running to govern in your name. Do they support an independent redistricting process? Will they co-sponsor legislation to create a process? And will they commit on the record? And you can ask them, they make themselves accessible because they're running for office. So we encourage, because we don't do it and we can't do it at a C3 level, we encourage each individual voter to ask these questions, to ask their questions, to tally, to collect this information and give it back to us, just so we know that, you are asking, and that we in the future can hold them accountable when they said what they did. And we can screenshot the email and save it for later if we need to, in case they change their mind in the future. So please, if you can, and if you know who's running for office in your district, please ask them, these very important questions. So these are our current tactics, and I think it's really nice to kind of see a visual of what we've been up to. So we kicked off an activist strategy planning retreat in April 2024 on April 20th. Over 60 people from all over Wisconsin showed up. Actually over 75 because we did have a virtual component. We met in Wausau, Wisconsin. Our goal was to distribute 50,000 brochures starting in May. We've already distributed over 37,000 in Spanish, Hmong, and English. We're expanding our brochures to be readily available in Urdu, Arabic, and Braille. So we want to make this as inclusive as possible to show more communities that not only accessibility matters, but also knowing this issue on fair maps. So we're already past our already close to our 50,000 goal. So we will be ordering more brochures, and we encourage you to place an order, and we will ship them to you. So if you want a couple of brochures, we'll make sure you get them. We've held now over 20 town halls and webinars like these in every Senate district. Our goal is to continue through October. And then we have a 50,000 postcard campaign. We've already kind of started it with a virtual component. And if you are happy to be part of a postcard drive, let me know, or let Annie know, and I will make sure you get details for the event, because it's really cool. All you need is your phone. And this new initiative, if there's an app called Reach, and I have to make sure it's available outside of the US, but they go based off of the contacts that you already have on your phone. So for example, I had almost 2,000 contacts, and then you take a selfie or you upload a picture that you already have, a picture of your dog, a picture of your cat. And we personalize the postcards now, where it says like, hi, my name's Yuseli, and you're my neighbor, or like, you're my friend, and please don't forget to vote. And it'll be a picture of yourself, and you can sign it off, and it's really, really personal. And we've recognized and done a study where it's more successful that way, when people see that personal touch. And then you might bump in, I might bump into somebody at a coffee shop, and they're like, hey, I got mail from you. And it was the one piece of mail that I actually read because it had your face on it, So we're trying to be more strategic about how we talk to voters and make it a more personal approach. So our goal is to send 50,000 postcards of these. So even if you're abroad, I'm sure you all have family members with 414 area codes, 262, 608, all of the Wisconsin area codes that we can geo-target based on the voter file. And our turnout goal is to turn out 80% of people that want to elect an accountable representative state legislature to the polls by November 5th, 2024. You have a brochure. All of these QR codes are interactive. You might have an issue if you need a VPN on your phone, but you can bypass that if you click that you trust the site. But the round QR code will take you to the legislature's map that I shared, and the square QR code will take you to more websites with fair voting map resources, as well as the Common Cause tracker to see how politicians are voting, and to see how politicians are supporting or not fair maps. It'll take you to the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign website and the Fair Maps Coalition website. And we really encourage that you please order them. The inside has the What Wisconsinites Want, which I went through. The middle panel is why voting matter, and then the timeline outlines what happened with maps since August. And if you want to have more personal conversations with your friend group, or if some people have questions about Wisconsin, because Wisconsin is going to be a swing state, you can definitely use this to talk to people about it. Again, I'll leave this up if you can. I don't know if you'll be able to open it, but we do encourage that you order voting district brochures. The minimum is 25. So maybe if one member, if you're, there's 2 or 3 of you within different countries that can get together to share these, we encourage that you do that. But if you can, please consider ordering some. If you need individual ones mailed, I can definitely mail you some. So just keep in contact. After November, we again expect a more representative and accountable state legislature. So with the possibility to pass legislation and propose an amendment to the Wisconsin state constitution establishing an independent nonpartisan redistricting process. Our goal is to continue informing voters about best practices and independent nonpartisan processes. We're connected to, like I said, Katie Fahey from Michigan, different fair redistricting projects all over the country that can help guide our work. We're also part of the League of Women Voters Ad Hoc Redistricting Committee, who will do this will tunnel vision it until they know each successful win in individual states and how they got the win and what they had to do in the processes that they had to go through. So we're making sure we do our homework so we can better help legislators craft legislation that best meets the needs of Wisconsin. And I'll just end with a quote by David Daley that we're the only ones who can save us. So grassroots action is our power. And I will take questions now, but I will also be calling Nick. Otherwise, I can definitely take the constitutional amendment.
Yeah. Does anybody have questions? Sam?
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Oh, hi, Yuseli. Thank you so much for that and for your work on this and everything. I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned specifically that there's no gerrymandering anymore in the state maps. I think you said the federal maps are still a work in progress or they're still not litigated yet. As I'm sure you know, and many people on the call know, there's like gerrymandering to try to like hide people's votes and prevent like a majority from being able to elect something and what have like to sway an election. But there's also gerrymandering that's used to ensure things like majority minority districts to make sure that minority populations can get access to the like the legislative process. Is there any concern or I guess quantification of whether or not that the lack of a gerrymander now is having a detrimental or positive or negative impact on the ability of minority populations to have representation?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And one of the requisites or one of the requirements by the two experts that helped select the best maps, that was one of their requests, that you cannot minimize or expand any districts that are considered, communities of interest. So they kept those the same. So in Milwaukee, in particular, Voces de la Frontera actually won in 2020. Voces de la Frontera is a pro-immigrant rights Latina organization. And they won. They were the only people that won the suit that they filed against the courts because they had taken away one very strong Latino voting district. And so they made two, and they kept those. And so anybody that did go and try to contest those issues, they made a case that they're not going to do wrong again because they learned with the Voces de la Frontera case, and they kept those the same. They kept a lot of the Black and brown communities in Milwaukee the same, but there's also Hmong community now, so they made sure that representation was also fairly included in the maps.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Yeah, great question, and that is something of a lot of people's concern as well, as we were trying to encourage people to support better maps. Well, if no other questions, you can put them in the chat, but I can move on to the constitutional amendment. Thankfully, I wear multiple hats. So because I work at Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and the Fair Maps Coalition, jack of all trades, master of none, but better than, jack of all trades, master of none, but better than a master of one. I think people always forget that there's a little bit more to that quote. Okay, just a second as I share my screen again. Share. All right, so there are two ballot questions and two constitutional amendment questions that will change the Constitution. These will change because they have already went through one cycle of the election process. And the two questions this is one of the first ones. It talks about current Wisconsin state law on governor accepting federal funds. And it reads as followed. Or Chapter 16, Section 54 of the Wisconsin statutes authorize the governor to accept and allocate federal funds. And it says, whenever the United States government shall make available to its state funds for education, the promotion of health, the relief of indigency, the promotion of agriculture, or for any other purpose other than the administration of tribal or any individual funds of Wisconsin natives, the governor, on behalf of the state, is authorized to accept the funds to make them readily available. In exercising the authority herein conferred, the governor may stipulate as a condition of the acceptance of the act of Congress by this state, such conditions as in the governor's discretion may be necessary to safeguard the interests of the state. So this is how it reads currently. The question that will be asked is, in terms of delegation of appropriation power, shall Section 35 of the Article 6 of the Constitution be created to provide that the legislature may not delegate its sole power to determine how monies shall be appropriated? So what would these amendments do? These amendments would prohibit the Wisconsin state legislature from delegating its power to appropriate money. The amendment was placed on a ballot with another question that will also require legislative approval via a joint resolution before the governor can expend federal money appropriated to the state. Currently, again, Chapter 16, Section 54 authorizes the governor to accept and allocate federal funds. So Wisconsin wants to prohibit the legislature from delegating the appropriations power amendment. The question on the ballot is referred to constitutional amendment for this. A yes vote will support amending the state constitution to prohibit the legislature from delegating its power to appropriate money. A vote no will oppose amending the state constitution to prohibit the legislature from delegating its power to appropriate money. An example that I can give, and thankfully we don't have these, but if an earthquake were to hit where I live, and as a homeowner who has qualified for federal grants, who has qualified for support to purchase this home, or help, if my house is torn down, if my roof blows away, I will have to wait. And even if the federal government's like, oh my God, huge devastating impact, here's all this money, here's everything to repair your house, it will sit between the governor's office and legislative officials for a while before they can make a decision whether they do want to appropriate the funds to us. So in an instance where, as current law states, there's an issue, the governor will receive the money and the governor will say, here you go, fix your roof. Now this will cause us to go through another process, which takes some power away from the governor from allowing us to fix our homes. If a pandemic were to happen again, we got federal money for relief, and then that money will sit for a long time while there's arguments or while there's decisions being made as how to appropriate that money. Even though the federal government has already said how to, it will go back and forth and people will continue to suffer if there was another pandemic. So who supports this amendment? It received unanimous support from voting Republicans during both considerations of the amendment. Robert Whittaker said that billions of federal dollars pour into our state in the last couple of years, and these supplemental federal funds were important to our state's economy, but only Governor Evers made the determination of allocating all that money. This would amend the Wisconsin Constitution by prohibiting the governor from allocating federal money without the approval of the legislature by joint resolution or by legislative rule. And it also provides that the legislature may not delegate its sole power to determine how money shall be appropriated. It's not listed on ballot. Actually, yes, it is now listed on Ballotpedia. The people that oppose this, the Wisconsin Education Association Council, the Wisconsin Association of Local Health Departments and Boards, Wisconsin Conservation Voters, Wisconsin Public Health Association, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, Common Cause of Wisconsin, All Voting is Local, America Votes, and other pro-democracy groups oppose this amendment. Now, question 2 reads, if the Constitution be created to prohibit the governor from allocating any federal monies the governor accepts on behalf of the state without the approval of the legislature by joint resolution or as provided by legislative rule. So again, this amendment would require legislative approval via joint resolution or legislative rule in order for the governor to allocate federal funds on behalf of the state. First question says, should the governor be the sole power to say what happens to federal money? And the second one is, should this happen through a joint resolution or legislative rule in order for the governor to allocate federal funds for the state? And currently, as I said, the governor can accept and allocate federal funds. The question on the ballot is referred to as the constitutional amendment. A vote yes would support amending the state constitution to require legislative approval via a joint resolution before the governor can expand federal money appropriated to the state. A vote no will oppose the amendment, thereby allowing the governor to accept and allocate federal funds without seeking legislative approval. Again, this is an issue about who supports, so it received unanimous support from voting Republicans. Howard Markland said the resolution increases accountability, efficiency, and transparency in the expenditure of funds received from the federal government by restoring the legislature's role in approving these expenditures. They say restoring, but really it just says gifting the legislature's role, because there's no, this wasn't an issue in the past where it doesn't need to restore anything back to them. The amendment was unanimously voted against by voting Democrats during both legislative sessions. The amendment is also opposed by the same folks: Wisconsin Education Association Council, the Association of Local Health Departments and Boards, Wisconsin Conservation Voters, Wisconsin Public Health Association, Democracy Campaign, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, All Voting's Local, and other pro-democracy groups. Jennifer Giegrich, of the Government Affairs Director of Wisconsin Conservation Voters, said this beautiful quote. These measures would amend the Wisconsin Constitution to add another level of government process during times when we are most vulnerable and depend on the efficiency and smooth process to receive much needed support. Our current system of the governor and legislature working together to fashion a timely state budget with known deadlines and a long deliberative process is not effective with dealing with emergencies. So we will have to wait for these processes to be in place. So we do have some letters to the editor that we encourage you either reading or sharing to vote no on constitutional amendment ballot questions this August. Yeah, so we don't, calls to actions are in reference. I think these are a little dated, but we're still looking for letters to the editor if you can. If you want to join virtually, you always can join a regional fair maps team. I encourage you to. I will also make sure you get this part of the presentation. If you see some of your counties, these folks are very heavily involved and are making sure a lot of this work is getting done. So if you would like to join a team, we encourage you to join a team, and you can contact me or Carlene, who's my co-organizing director, for to contacts and to get contacted. But I saw a question or a comment in the chat. Yeah, and if you asked me if I was governor and if the Democrats were to introduce something like this, we would not support the amendment. Like, I wouldn't support the amendment because it's just giving more power to people that think they're going to have power forever, right? What they're failing to see is that if they don't have power forever, then Democrats are now going to have this power, right? Like, I think it's very narrow-minded, but it's also an issue for if Project 2025 actually happens, right? The power that this will be giving this state. And I can't talk more about that because we're recording and we're at C3 space, but it is really scary. Laura?
Yeah, so I kind of had a question a bit about the kind of impact of like discussing this in the news media. From abroad, we get our ballots a bit earlier. So 45 days before the election. And if you're registered, so with the registration, if you're registered as with a permanent overseas, then you don't get the state level ones. You only get the federal levels, probably similar to what you were saying about Mexico. But if you registered as a temporary overseas, and that's something that like different people register for different reasons, you do get the full ballot with the local elections, the state. But so we have kind of, I think, the luck of being able to look at our ballot, see it, read about it, and think about it. But like the average voter doesn't. They normally will get it. They go into a place to fill it out and do everything. So I find it really fascinating that the news media doesn't seem to be covering these that much, because like the average voter is going to possibly see them when they go to vote and have to make a decision. And of course, when you're just the plain text reading of it, if you're not really versed in kind of all these different ways that this could impact, it doesn't, okay, yeah, it makes sense to include the legislature, right? Like it doesn't really look like that. So why do you think it is that like the news media isn't considering this or like kind of going over this as much? I mean, has there been any kind of outreach about that? It just seems something that is kind of, it's very difficult. And even from abroad, what generally, like even the ones that have come on before, I'm Googling it, trying to find something that's not geo-blocked. It's quite difficult. So I was just curious to know maybe your thoughts on that.
Well, they do it on purpose. They do it so they can dramatically influence and impact a positive one on their end. We also had this in the April, there was also a referendum question in April, and we had no time to educate. We had no time to do it. And they put legal limits on how much you can advocate for financially. So we can only spend collectively as a nonprofit coalition $10,000 to do educational outreach on these amendments. So they limit us, they're literally cutting one of our hands when it comes to being able to do any type of education. And don't even get me started on the questions in Spanish. Like, if you need to read these questions in Spanish, they make absolutely no sense. Like, in any other language, it's like, what? Like, yes, this sounds like a good idea, so sure, I guess I'll do it, but I'm not sure. And asking the way that they ask, like, even the same-sex marriage question was really skewed, and we lost because of how skewed the question was. People was like, oh yeah, I support same-sex marriage, yes, and it was actually, you're supposed to say no, like, so they do this on purpose. But what I did get to share with you, and I think it bypasses you won't need VPN, is we have a toolkit that we worked collectively with legal experts and the League of Women Voters, which is a vote no toolkit, which is allows you to help other people in terms of what they making an accurate decision and what the constitutional amendments actually mean. So there's messaging, there's content, there's actions, there's other resources. There's also available in Spanish. There's graphics that you can share. You can, copy and paste the newsletter blurb if you want to put it on a newsletter or an op-ed. Like, we encourage doing that. Because there's also another constitutional amendment question in the November ballot, which will change the Constitution. And it already says, like, if you're a citizen in Wisconsin, only a citizen can vote. But it is going to change, and we haven't moved there yet. Let's get through August first, and then we'll go through the educational component for November. We're asking people to vote no because it will change the Constitution to say only citizens can vote and participate in every single election. This is limiting the power of people to, and we don't have it in Wisconsin, but for example, New York, you can vote for school board, you can vote for smaller legislative races, because if you're undocumented like me and my kids are going to school, I should have some say in how my citizen children work throughout, the world and work throughout their county and in their school. So yes, we are doing our best to also do a vote no campaign in November, where you vote no to change the Constitution. And Wisconsin citizens are the only ones allowed to vote anyway. So why would I, an undocumented person, make perjury or to try and get myself deported by voting? Like, people really think that this is what we do. And no, we're working really hard to educate people on fair maps and yeah. And Wendy, I think I saw your hand up for a second.
Well, first of all, Sally, thank you so much for the amazing work that you're doing. And when you were explaining that ballot thing that people are supposed to vote on, I think it's terribly confusing. My question is, do even half the people who will vote in the primary understand that it's going to be on the ballot or know what it's about?
No, unfortunately, no.
Well, I just wanted to just add a little bit of anecdotal stuff. I'm sort of an odd duck here because I'm in Chicago, and so many people who live in Illinois want to go to Michigan, want to go to Wisconsin to help in any way that we can. So keep that in mind. And I went to a fundraiser for Ben Wickler, and he specifically talked about the fundraiser raised $100,000 from people in Chicagoland to hire, I think, 14 organizers 6 weeks early, so they would get experience to have one election under their belt, the primary before the national election. So I guess my question really, I mean, that's good, but guess my question is, how can we help? And it's easy for me, for instance, bring a gang of friends to Kenosha. Is there something that DA or you would, particularly like us to focus on?
Yeah, that's really helpful, and thank you for all the work that you are doing, and even all of you that are abroad that care about these issues. That postcard drive that I mentioned, anybody can do it from any part of the world. You will definitely target some of my contacts, some of them are in Mexico, so like 300 contacts didn't work, but it matches them to the voter file, and you can send, a postcard with your face on it, something that people will recognize and they won't toss because it has your face on it. So it's kind of like a save the date invite. It kind of scares people like, oh my God, I shouldn't toss this. So it creates a reminder. And so we are going to do a postcard drive, and that would be really helpful if July 11th is the date of our postcard drive. I can give you more details when I have it.
Oh, okay.
Encouraging, whatever you can do and to become a social media activist, right? I think when we think of activism and organizing, like we forget that there's an entire disabled community who is an activist from their bed because they can't get out of bed. And sometimes even as a bodily abled person, like I was like, I can't get out of bed, but I know that I'm doing it in solidarity with all of my friends by sharing out stuff on social media, by sending something to my email list. It's very easy to say like, oh, well, you're not doing enough. But I think everybody here is already trying to do everything that we can with the resources that we do have.
Yeah, and apropos of that too, I understand that only about 10% of expat Wisconsinites vote. So how do we all work together to raise those numbers? Because in individual county races, it could make the difference between winning and losing. Anybody have thoughts on that?
And as a Mexican living in the US, it's the same thing. Like there's just a lack of education from even like the consulates who we go to, or embassies that should have more funds appropriated to expand voting access and expand the vote. There is that lack of, and yeah.
I can speak a little bit to the question about how to get more Wisconsinites voting from abroad. We have a special situation in Wisconsin where you can only vote in state and local elections if you mark on your ballot request that you intend to return. And that's sort of, it's a very sort of fuzzy question because you don't have to have a specific date by which you intend to return or a plane ticket home or anything like that. But you do have to express intent to return, and you may have to provide to your local clerk some kind of proof of residency, like an electric bill or a driver's license or something like that. So a lot of people get scared off by that, and they also get scared off by the possible tax implications of voting from abroad and stating that you are an in-state voter. So that 10% is, it seems very low, and yet it's really hard to break that barrier. That's basically our main mission, though, of this group, is to reach as many of those people as possible and help them insofar as we can to, ask themselves the hard questions and figure out whether they understand the implications of not voting as well as of voting.
Do we know how many people there are? What's the population we're talking about of Wisconsinites outside of the US?
It belonging to Democrats abroad or in total?
Well, just I guess one and then the other.
Yeah,
I Googled it, and it says 110,000 people.
110,000 according to whom? That's a very high number. I haven't heard that number.
Wikipedia.
Because that's what that's what I would like to do is to do outreach as much as possible to say this election is so important, even if you haven't voted before.
So what I can tell you is 2 years ago, we had a postcard campaign. We worked with the Wisconsin Dems, and they provided us with a list of overseas voters who had voted Democrat in the past. And we sent a letter to them and encouraged them to vote and to register. And it was quite successful in ticking up that number. I don't know yet about the plans for doing that this year.
But do you remember how many that was, Annie? Was it
how
like
many
10,000?
How many letters? No, I think it was
how big? Yeah.
20-some thousand maybe. But don't quote me on that, because I'm really not. I wasn't as involved then as I am now, so I don't remember. Andrew has a question, and he might, Andrew's our voter protection guru.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to talk about. I can actually first answer Wendy's question, which is kind of a vague answer, but the numbers of overseas voters, not just in Wisconsin, but from every state, is almost impossible to pinpoint. because first of all, there's no way to, when we leave the country, we don't have to register that we're leaving. So we can leave for, 30 days, we can leave for a year, we can do whatever. So it's always in flux. People often don't even know that they have the right and the ability to vote when they're abroad. So they don't tell their local election official that they're abroad and that they want to vote because they don't know that they can. And oftentimes they're told that they can't. And then also there's a lot of students that come abroad for only 6 months or a year or a semester. And that's always in flux. So it's really hard to say. But what I was going to say is that I think since Wisconsin requires that all ballots are returned by mail, not every state is like that, by the way. Only 22 states require you to only mail your ballots in. Wisconsin is one of them. That can stifle ballots from, let's say, Mexico, where they don't really have a mail system in place, or Ecuador, or even a place like Australia, which does have good mail system, but they're so far away. So if you're mailing your ballot from Australia, even the day you get it, it might not arrive. So ballots come out for the November election on the 21st of September. That's 45 days before the election. What we recommend as voter assistance is to fill out and send backup ballots, which is your right as a voter from abroad. Because you can send that out even before the 45-day deadline to receive your ballot. So let's say you sent it out now.
That's the FOBAB or whatever it's called?
Yeah, exactly. It's called the Federal Write-in Absentee Ballot, but I just call it the backup ballot because it's easier. That can be used by any Wisconsin voter or any voter from abroad from any state. And it can be sent in, for instance, you could send it in right now. Especially if you live like for you in Victoria, BC.
Well, no, I'm actually, I'm back in Chicago. But yeah, so Andrew, what I'm seeking to do, because I'm a sort of more of a miniaturist and maximalist, since I was associated with DA Canada, Canada is a country where the mail does work pretty well. And what if, I focused on that list of people, reaching out to those people to help them, fill out the ballots. We also have the complicating factor if there's the primary election and the general, and what if Biden decides to step aside?
Well, that's if someone is filling out a federal write-in absentee ballot, the backup ballot, the special thing that you can do on that ballot is you don't have to actually have a candidate's name. You can just say Democrat or Republican or whatever your party affiliation is.
Very good to know.
And that way also, if you don't know how to spell the person's name or, whatever, they will and have to accept that too. But it obviously doesn't work for a primary because if there's two people of the same
Democrats,
party running, then you can't just say Democrat, for instance.
And where do people get the backup ballot?
It's on the FVAP website, but also I and our voting assistance team are available right now after this call to help anyone right now. But also, if you go to votefromabroad.org, there's a little white banner at the top, and you can schedule an appointment, or you can come to a voting assistance scheduled event, and we can help you fill one out and find it. We can't obviously help you vote, but there's a lot of information that you need to attach to the form, but we can walk you through all of that.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry to hog this.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Do we have any other questions, or should we let Yuseli have the rest of her day back? She has a whole day ahead of her, unlike us in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that information. We had questions, but you answered probably every one that we pre-prepared, so that was great. We
did. We had a whole bunch of questions.
We had a bunch of questions.
Going through them all.
So thank you so much. It was really, really detailed, really helpful.
Thank you. That means I did my job right. So I appreciate you all so much. Again, my apologies for Nick not joining, but I'm happy that I get to wear many hats. So I get to talk about many subjects. I am going to now enjoy my day, and I'm going to go to a hot air balloon festival. So I'm really
Wow.
excited about that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you all. Have a lovely day. And
Thank
if you
you.
want me back in November, let me know because I'll come back before November.
Oh, that would be
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
really
Let's
great.
take you up on that.
I'm sharing the link. Oh, yeah, so is Andrew to go if anybody wants to go over to the Zoom room for some voter assistance. Thank you, Yuseli. Have a nice time.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks all for coming. I'm going to stop the recording.